The Wild Bunch is a 1969 American film directed by Sam Peckinpah and stars William Holden, Ernest Borgnine, Robert Ryan, Edmund O'Brien, Warren Oates, Jaime Sanchez, Ben Johnson, Emilio Fernandez, and Strother Martin. The plot follows a gang of outlaws looking to make one final score so they can retire and put that life behind them. Times were changing, and it was the end of the era of the outlaw, which is the major theme throughout this film, and this takes place in 1913. The story here, fairly simple, really, as a lot of Western films are, in my opinion, from what little I do know about the genre, but it's got so much richness, I would say, and depth and twists and turns that are just part of what makes this such a masterpiece. I don't really watch a ton of 60s films. I know this is 69, but 60s in general, or even early 70s. And I sure haven't seen all that many Westerns. So going into this review, I was pretty nervous. But as a Western film, this is just so tailor-made for me. And I was blown away on just numerous levels. And this was my first watch, by the way, ever. And it was my second go-around with director Sam Peckinpah. My first film that I've seen from him, not even that long ago, and I reviewed it here on the channel, was Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, which I just absolutely fucking loved. I think this film is even better, and yeah, I'm just kind of swooning over these two Sam Peckinpah films. I don't know where I should go from here, so let me know. What's my number 3 gonna be? The opening of the film shows our gang already en route to their heist, which was robbing a railroad payroll office. Kind of like I said earlier on, this was to be enough money for them to be able to retire and just leave this dangerous life behind them. And this leads to a massive gunfight scene that, to me, was very reminiscent of Michael Mann's Heat. And for 1969, I gotta say, this is probably the most violent scene that I've personally ever seen. And when I say probably, I mean by far. And as the gang are riding into town, you see a group of kids putting scorpions in the middle of giant clusters of red ants. And this is real shit, because it's like the camera zoomed in on it. This is 1969, no CGI, no special effects that we know today. This was kind of crazy to me. And this told me straight away all I needed to know. These are tough, violent times. And another notable scene that happens kind of right around that time is as the gang are on their way to their heist, they're strolling into town on their horses, 2 of them stop to help an old woman cross the street. This was an important detail, if you ask me. I mean, sure, these guys are outlaws, they're scoundrels to an extent, but they have a code of honor. They don't hurt innocent people, and they look after each other. As far as I can see, they mostly rob government agencies. The gang are led by Pike Bishop, played by William Holden, and he's kind of the main character here. Now, I had read that, so first of all, I'm not super familiar with William Holden's career, but I guess for years before this film, he had just been kind of turning in uninspired performances in uninspired films. I'm sure he was just, taking that bit of information. I imagine he was just getting those jobs done. But here he shines like he had not in years, and what a great performance. I can't remember if he was either nominated for something for this performance. Maybe he won an award. I can't remember, but it's noteworthy for sure. And Pike Bishop, he's a good man, even if he is sort of an anti-hero of sorts, I guess you would say. His best years are behind him. He's older, he's rougher. He just wants to retire and lay low for his remaining years. This is a very character-driven film that took influence from Akira Kurosawa, was a massive influence on Quentin Tarantino, so it definitely has a number of standout characters. Edmund O'Brien, Warren Oates, Jaime Sanchez, Ben Johnson, and my personal favorite, Ernest Borgnine, are all amazing as the gang. But on the other side, you have Deke Thornton, played by Robert Ryan, who's been pursuing the gang for some time, along with a group of lowly bounty hunters. Again, with the Heat comparisons, just think of William Holden as Robert De Niro and Robert Ryan as Al Pacino. But what makes the two stories very different is that Deke Thornton used to be part of this gang. And Deke is given an ultimatum by law enforcement. He can capture the gang, or he can go back to prison for the rest of his life. Another important part of the plot here is, like I said earlier, the time period, which is 1913. And also, like I said earlier, it was the end of the era of the outlaw, you know, and this might be odd, but I'm actually reminded a little bit of The Sopranos, because The Sopranos was set at a time where it was the end of the era of the American Mafia, and that really, to me, made it stand out. Another cool and unique thing about The Wild Bunch being set in 1913 is that you're watching a Western film with modern firearms. Speaking of guns and violence, the battle scene at the end is even crazier than the one at the beginning. And the ending is great. It's a great ending and has many Sam Peckinpah trademarks. If you know what I mean, if you've seen it, you definitely do. And if you've seen some of his other stuff, you do. And while we're still on the topic of violence, Sam Peckinpah himself stated, and I found this very interesting, that it was important for this film to show the type of violence that was common back then. He thought that most Western films up until this point were tame, sanitized, and just in general unrealistic. And that's kind of the problem I have had with a lot of like Westerns that I grew up like watching with my grandfather and stuff. I'm just like, these are so boring, you know, like, I'm sorry if you're a fan of the genre. I do like some, but some of them are just, I couldn't get into them. So Peckinpah also wanted the violence to shock people and make just violence in general unappealing. He wanted, I can't remember how he worded it, but something about like he wanted them to be just completely turned off by the violence. And when he learned that it said violence of his films excited some people, and some people that came to be a thing that people were interested when it came to a Peckinpah film, he found it actually disturbing. Can you imagine that? Like, I mean, we've had so many decades of just over-the-top violent films that, you know, just imagine how this might have came across in 1969, and even for that time, this is a violent film, but interesting dude, that Peckinpah. And in case you weren't aware, The Wild Bunch is considered one of the best films of all time by critics over the decades, ever since this has came out. Sam Peckinpah and his cinematographer Lucien Ballard were using top techniques of the time, like multi-angle, quick cut editing, using normal and slow motion images. So on a technical level, for the time, this was masterful. I'm giving The Wild Bunch I can't give it anything lower than a 10. 10 out of 10, man. Look, I think you get the point. I'm not a huge Western fan. I like some spaghetti Western stuff, and this is easily on par with, to me, stuff like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. It should be mentioned alongside films like that. I'm sure it probably is. And to be honest, this film might make it hard for me to enjoy a lot of other Western films going forward, but I'm okay with that. The characters, the period-accurate violence, the underlying themes, the disdain for both U.S. and Mexican governments. The Wild Bunch has it all, and more. If you aren't big on Western films, don't let that deter you from watching this. If you're a fan of Kurosawa or Tarantino, you will like this. Cheers, guys.